We'll see if this works. First of all, trying the Kindle again, but this time with the camera facing the other way. So we'll see if it works. I'd like to mention that I'm going to actually put a viewer discretion advised on this one. And what that means is if you're offended by certain words or if you have triggers around sexual abuse and the such, and you're not able to handle those triggers without a reaction that might be harmful to your sense of peace, you might want to skip this one. We're continuing on with Refuge Recovery, a Buddhist path to recovering from addiction by Levine. And we're continuing on with RuthAnn's story, chapter 21. I grew up in religion. My parents were part of a large Christian cult/ministry that practiced radical outreach on college campuses all over the United States. I think they really believed they were going to change the world. My dad was fiery and charismatic, handsome and charming. People loved him. People loved my family. I grew up homeschooled and transient, always bouncing from town to town as my dad received preaching gigs. We eventually landed back in my father's hometown in Tennessee, where we lived with my grandparents. My brothers and I were unceremoniously dumped into public school. This is when I started to have trouble coping. I had been chronically molested by the brother of a playmate before we moved to Tennessee, and insomnia and shame had become part of my life. I was 8 years old, and my mind was out of control, especially at night. I remember repeating scenarios over and over and feeling tortured, afraid, and full of self-loathing. I would lie there for hours trying to decide if I should tell my parents what was happening. I started finding ways to avoid my memory. I read a lot. I had story tapes I listened to. By the time I entered 4th grade, I started feeling different and unacceptable, and not as good as others. I cried all the time. I couldn't handle my homework assignments. I felt so inadequate, overwhelmed by fear, and longing for things to be different. Eventually, I learned to survive. I've made friends. Social acceptance was medicine. I made friends with wealthy girls, girls with horses. I learned to ride and joined 4-H. I always felt like the poor kid the rich folks were helping out. I always felt so scared and longed to fit in, to be good enough. My father was a youth minister at a non-denominational church. It was pretty normal at first, eventually transforming into an evangelical bedlam with wild ceremonies about hell and sin, absolution and eternity. I came of age believing my soul was in constant jeopardy, studying my Bible as much as possible and committing to sexual abstinence in hopes of a holy marriage, hoping that would ease how grotesque I felt after what my friend's brother had done to me. These are my first spiritual memories, longing for God and relief from my guilt and my shame. I wanted so badly to feel whole and loved. I truly believed that if I could be good enough, pray hard enough, I would get better. I pretty much always felt bad though. Depression and anxiety consumed me. as well as my overwhelming longing for love. As I entered my teens, my early teens, I began to grow disenfranchised with God and church, along with my father. I started to find more solace and connection in depressing literature and what the church called secular music. I had a brief but powerful romance with a boy too old for me, who broke up with me after I fell asleep with him. I was crushed. It was the beginning of a pattern in my life. My older brother started drinking heavily by the time he reached high school. I think I was 13 when he gave me my first drink, and I felt accepted by him and warm inside. Then he got me stoned. I felt special and different. I started drinking and smoking weed whenever I could. My parents left town one weekend, and my brother threw a party. A guy from my church came over, got me drunk, and took advantage of me sexually. The memory of how I shut down emotionally that night is still very clear to me. It was almost a decision to pursue self-destruction. From then on, I was totally committed to my search for non-existence. Every drug, every man, everything I could do to get outside myself and not feel. Fuck God. Fuck my parents. Fuck church. Fuck love. Fuck me. I started working when I was 15 for a little family-owned restaurant. A lot of the employees were college-aged, and I was quickly taken in as part of the group, almost as a pet. House parties and bars were a regular part of my life, and even at that age, I felt totally motivated to my desire to drink. Hanging out with these older people always felt like an opportunity to get fucked up, the beginning of using people to get what I wanted. Also, the beginning of waking up to blurred memories of things I wish I hadn't done. Haphazard blowjobs given to men twice my age, or making out with some college guy in front of a video camera. The next day, I just pushed all this stuff out of my mind, terrified by it. Then Isaac entered my life during this time. Isaac was 22, drunk, and a pseudo-rock star type who lived with his mom. I was drawn to him almost as much as I was drawn to alcohol. We started meeting in secret, fooling around. I would wait and wait to hear from him, and go to meet him, and let him touch me and get me off in the back of his stupid van in a parking lot, behind gas stations, backcountry roads. I would go home smelling faintly of sex and the foyer grease from wherever shitty restaurant he was employed at. Sometimes he would show up where we were supposed to meet. Sometimes I would just wait and wait, angry and savoring the pain of being wronged when he blew me off. My parents had no clue I was drinking or in a relationship with Isaac. I had become an expert at hiding and manipulating, giving them what they wanted to hear and see. At home, I was getting ready for college. As part of my homeschool education, I was enrolled in a community college classes. I was thin and pretty and outgoing, and according to my parents, smart and talented. I worked hard and bought my first car. I was awarded enough scholarship money to pay for nearly all of my university education. I graduated at 17 and headed off to a nearby school with zero skills or self-respect, and a serious desire to get out of myself. I almost immediately attached myself to the people who provided an environment for getting messed up, which is when I started my drug experimentation. Acid, ecstasy, mushrooms, pills. My second semester, I got tangled up with a sweet, gentle, rich, kind cokehead named Toe, who introduced me to all the wonderful numbing effects of blow. I attached myself to Toe because he provided me with attention and alcohol and drugs. I knew my behavior hurt Toe, but I kept But that didn't stop me from fooling around with other guys. I knew my behavior hurt Toe, but I kept after what I wanted. Party, party, party. That's all I wanted. One night at a party, I left with a friend named Whiskey Ben. I woke up in his bed the next day. Blood covered the sheets. That's how I lost my technical virginity, although my innocence had been gone since I was a child. When I left that early morning, I took the sheets and my nearly empty gallon of Evan Williams. It was a rainy day, and I felt nothing. Despite all my sexual distractions, I stayed in touch with Isaac, always addicted to his unavailability. One night, he drunkenly yelled at me over the phone while I was with Toe. I wanted to get back at him. Toe had a jar full of drugs: morphine, Xanax, Adderall, Coke, MDMA. He was really absent-minded and accidentally threw it away. I remember watching him come out of the dumpster holding it, victorious. We bought a bunch of booze and really went for it that night. We did all the blow, all the MDMA. Then I have a vague memory of him chopping up lines mixed with morphine pills and Adderall and lines of Xanax. At one point, I was on my knees in front of the coffee table. He took my hand and asked me to trust him. The next thing I remember was being outside of my body, having a beautiful dream and being alive in it. I don't know how long it lasted. I regained consciousness to Toe crying over me, saying he couldn't get me to wake up, that he picked me up and threw my body around with no result, and that he was scared. I came out of my stupor a little, and all I could think about was the stupid exam I had that day, that I had to get to class. We got into Toe's truck, and he started driving me to campus. He was still pretty fucked up and probably scared about how I had maybe almost died. He looked over at me while he was driving and said, "You are so beautiful." His truck went off the road, and he jumped a ditch. Somehow, he still got me to campus, and I ran into my ridiculous Theater Appreciation 101 class, probably answered C on all the questions, and then ran back out and sat on the ground and cried. I knew something was wrong, that all this behavior was not okay. I briefly tried to just drink, thinking it was all the drugs that were the problem. That lasted maybe a week or two. Things just kept getting worse. I drank harder, kept after the drugs, fell with more and more older guys, all of whom would sleep with me until they got tired of me or my drinking. I was just 18, and guys were already frustrated with my need to bring handles of liquor into the bedroom. This is the behavior I repeated over and over for the next 8 years, harming myself with men and sex, covering it up with alcohol, carving this groove into my heart, making a hard, smooth place where nothing could stick or stay. An obsidian surface good for nothing but breaking things. The end of my spring semester of my freshman year, I bought tickets to a concert down in Atlanta. My little brother loved this band, and I got permission to make the 4-hour drive. My 16-year-old brother and I hopped in my car with these two guys, Joe and Tim. And I had just met them. They were strangers, really. I was really nervous, a small-town girl with not much experience driving in the big city. I hated driving even in nearby Nashville, so obviously partying on the way down was the best solution for my anxiety. We boozed the whole way. Broke and underage, when we ran out of beer, we would just stop at a grocery and steal it. Miraculously, I got us to the venue. Inside, I bumped into a friend who sold me Adderall. I chopped up a few, snorted them, and convinced him to sell me more than he really wanted to. Feeling more awake, I agreed to go pick up some food with one of the guys, and we left my brother with the other dude. Drunk, tired, high on pills. I rear-ended a limo in about 8 minutes. Tim's head cracked my windshield. The airbag busted my chin open. Our first thought was the weed we had and all the open beers. We stupidly started tossing beer cans out into the street. I recently found a court document from this incident, and it said, Defendant Dylan did not inquire about the well-being of the limousine driver, but instead started pouring alcoholic beverages into the street. I got arrested, and Tim went to the show, where he explained what happened to my baby brother. In the back of the cop car, I ate all of my Adderall. I couldn't believe what was happening to me. The arrest and subsequent charges just seemed to entangle me more with the crazy lifestyle I was living. It felt like what I deserved. I started to identify more and more with my using lifestyle, not caring. My best friend at the time, when she would get a little tipsy, liked to say, "This is RuthAnn. She don't give a fuck, y'all. Goddamn RuthAnn," was another nickname I got used to. My parents let me move home, where I went back to high school job and feebly attempted classes at the community college. I used my scholarship money I had left over to buy coke and party with my friends from my old college. Often I would just disappear for days, not answering my phone, sleeping on friends' couches, and terrifying my family until I would come crawling home. There were periods where I would attempt to pull it together. I got a decent job at a catering company in Nashville, which also gave me more opportunity for getting away from home and getting drunk. I remember partying one night and freaking out the next day because I couldn't find my shoes for work. My friends and I found them in the middle of the road. I met Big Mike at that job. He was tall and strong, loud and smart, a handsome, authoritative figure in his chef uniform. He was 28 and going through a divorce. I was 20, and I guess my mess was hidden enough that at work that he took an interest in me. He had a house and an education. He was working on his master's degree. I lived in unending delusion that this guy would rescue me, that if I could be good enough, he would love me, and all my sins would be absolved. My past would be forgiven, and I would be vindicated and seen. I was anxious every day, filled with an overwhelming need for attention, which sometimes he gave me, and sometimes he didn't. I know now that I loved the roller coaster and pain. He would get furious with me if I came over drunk, so I tried to hide it. I needed to be drunk to have sex with him, so I was always a tightrope walk, a juggling act, a shit show circus, trying to find the balance of how much I could drink before he would get frustrated, but drunk enough so I could give him what I thought he wanted. I changed how I dressed. I stopped hanging out with the hippies. I mostly quit doing drugs. I tried to be what he wanted, but my relationship with him was so painful. I used alcohol to numb myself and perpetrate my delusion. I eventually changed jobs and became a full-time server. Working in a restaurant was a perfect fit for my lifestyle. I made decent money, and all the people that worked with me were like a dysfunctional family who condoned all my favorite twisted behaviors. We'd make a pile of cash and then be rubbed so raw by our day or night of work, we would hit the bar with serious intent. Our manager loved to party as well. Well, he'd get drunk and hit on the girls. I spent a Sunday afternoon doing blow with him and another young girl, getting out of our minds, out of our clothes. There was always some guy I worked with available to help me harm myself with alcohol and sex. This was when I started to feel the need to drink in the mornings or afternoons between shifts to ease exhaustion or numb hangovers. I was still living at home during this time, and Mike had moved nearby. A distance had developed between us, but I was still so attached to the idea of him. He picked me up one night and we slept together. I was kind of drunk, of course. On the drive home the next day, I told him about how I was in therapy and trying to get better. As he dropped me off, he told me it was a good idea and to keep trying. He called me that night to tell me he was dating someone. I was destroyed and tore into a liter of vodka with ferocity. I stayed drunk for a solid couple of days. The next week, I showed up and wasted to work and got sent home. A friend let me come over and feed me a few painkillers and some booze, and I slept for a long, long time. My therapist convinced me it was time for rehab. I decided I could give it a shot, knowing that I couldn't live with all the pain anymore. The scariest part for me was sitting my parents down and telling them I needed to go and that I needed a ride there. As my mom dropped me off, I remember trying to comfort her. "I'll be okay, Mom. I just want to get better so I could make it all better and be loved." In rehab, I was a good camper. I did what they said, tried to be honest about my feelings, behaved myself. They bussed us to AA meetings. I ate salad and played volleyball. I could do what they said, and I would get fixed. They recommended I move to a halfway house when I left treatment, so I did. I felt so lost and alone and lasted only a few weeks before I moved home. My mom came to help me move my things. On the way home, I took a different route so I could stop and buy a bottle. It felt like someone else was driving the car. I could probably separate myself from that moment and move outside of my body in order to deny the truth and get what I needed to escape consciousness. I got another restaurant job and started increasing my skills and functioning drunk on a daily basis. I bought a bottle to work, hid beers in the bathroom, stole booze from the bar. I got caught several times, but for reasons I still don't understand, I didn't get fired from the job. I found more men to degrade me and reinforce my self-hatred. I'd wake up in a dilapidated house on a dirty mattress or hiding in the apartment above a tattoo shop with some old man old enough to be my dad. My parents would always look for me, my younger siblings getting accustomed to my insane behavior. No one trusted me. Everyone was tired of my tears and pathetic excuses. They would get so angry with me, and I would never get them to understand that there was no one more angry at me than me. I was my greatest judge. I punished myself more than anyone ever could. Total destruction is what I wanted and deserved. Chris started working at my restaurant. He was older and cute and had a great taste in music. I wanted his attention. I came on to him. He had his own struggles with alcohol. I was drunk the first time we hung out, and I never changed that. I started staying over a lot. I had a place to drink, someone to ease my loneliness. I was taking a lot of Xanax during this time. One morning, still drunk from the night before, I started drinking and took some pills. I decided to clean and do laundry for Chris. I think I blacked out or passed out for a second while driving and near-ended someone again. Being in my hometown, the arresting officer was a guy whose wedding I had been in. This was all just more stuff I could use against myself to confirm that horrible person I knew I was. I couldn't face my parents, and Chris let me move in immediately. I stayed with him for 3 years, putting him through all the ups and downs of my drinking, trying to quit, not being able to. I drank so much that sometimes I'd wet our bed. He never got angry with me. I tried my best to love him, but there was nothing inside of me to really give. He took care of me and fed me. I would have brief periods of sobriety when things would be bright and fun. Then I would just go deep into my shame and pain in pursuit of non-existence. I clung to him and used him to help me survive and stay drunk. A year after my DUI, I was finally sentenced to 5 days in jail, much better than the 45 I was supposed to serve. I detoxed a bit, and the relief was amazing. I decided to return to my therapist and to try to start over. I got my own apartment and tried to get healthy and normal. It took several months, but eventually I started losing my urge to drink to excess. My therapist started helping me face my sexual trauma and my anger towards my parents, who were going through a messy divorce. Using eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, called EMDR, I learned a little bit about sitting with the emotional pain of my experiences and knowing that I was okay. From my own research into when I was dealing with my sexual abuse, my childhood sexual abuse, I looked into every possible therapy possible. And eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR, was something that I never did have access to, but everything I read about it spoke volumes on how well it worked. So some food for thought for those out there that might be interested in that might resonate with. Again, it's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR therapy. It was amazing to be able to speak the truth about things that had happened in my family. I quit drinking, started exercising. I enrolled in a Spanish class and excelled. I started liking myself just a little bit. I was finally taking care of myself. I lost a ton of weight and felt good. I started finding out little things like what colors I liked, things trying to connect with myself. I stopped having sex with Chris and slowly let go of that relationship. I knew I needed to end it, but I felt so guilty and dependent on him to be okay on my own. My actions weren't fair to him, but I didn't know how else to extract myself. It was all so new. I felt closer to my family and finally able to be there for my little brother and sister. The hardest part was finding people in that small town I could connect with. I didn't have many people I could relate to, and I always felt like I was trying to make up for my reputation. I met my friend Celia, a loving, beautiful world traveler who led a life that inspired me. She invited me to move to Mexico with her. I decided to do it. I thought I could do it and stay sober, but shortly before I left, I decided I could manage drinking again. After a few months of tasting life how I wanted it to be, I went back to school. I went back to alcohol. Nothing disastrous happened. I upset my family, but I was able to manage things. I turned 25, gave up my apartment, left my job, broke up with Chris, packed my bag, and headed to the mountains of Mexico. Mexico was amazing, but it was a place where I could feed my addiction without fear. My skills as a drunk showed up for me, and I immediately found men to lean on. I knew inside that I was depriving myself of something, that I was missing out on the greater part of this experience, but I couldn't really stop myself. I didn't want to. It felt great to have my ability to party accepted, to seek out nothing but fun. I came home drunk and broke. I had to move back in with my mom. As Celia got her things in order so she could move back to Mexico long term, I was stuck again. I went back to my old restaurant. I slept on my mom's couch, re-exhibiting all the behaviors that had gone on for years. I eventually made my way out of town to Nashville. I started new jobs where my drinking would immediately interfere and I would get fired. I was broker than I ever been in my life. I truly didn't recognize myself in the mirror. My face was always swollen and red. My skin was horrible. I had thinning hair and I was overweight again despite how little I actually ate. My mouth was always raw from dehydration and from drinking Taka, Taaka, right out of the bottle. I put myself in more dangerous situations, waking up in strange beds with stranger men, driving drunk again. I thought about death so much that it scared me. I met another older guy who provided me with booze and sex and food. My body started to have trouble with all of the abuse, and a urinary tract infection turned into a kidney infection overnight. I was drinking and pissing blood. I went to the ER and they gave me antibiotics and pain meds. I kept drinking. I went home for Christmas drunk as hell, stopping only to pick up a 40 once. My little brother received a little bottle of whiskey for Christmas. I drank it with a handful of pills. A sloppy, crying, thieving, disaster on Christmas. My little sister looked at me and told me she was done with me. I had no money, and I was about to get fired again. I could hardly function anymore. I left my mom's house after Christmas, desperate to not drink. I didn't want to go into rehab again, but I knew I had to change something. I bought a beer on the way home. I remember sipping it as I looked at my ER bill. I got a bottle of wine after work. I remember being too tired to drink much, but knew I couldn't sleep without it. The pain that entered my body whenever I quit drinking was terrifying. My heart felt like it would explode. I truly didn't want to do this to myself anymore. I really, really wanted to learn to live. I ran into an old friend who invited me for coffee. He seemed different and happier than I remember him. I clutched at the table in the coffee shop, trying to hang on as I told him I was desperate to change my life. I was scared and afraid of death, and I didn't want to drink anymore. I told him how I felt that rehab and AA weren't the answer for me. He told me about this meditation group he was going to. He told me that it definitely wasn't a cult and that I should give it a try. I showed up to my first meditation feeling pretty blank. I had managed to not drink for a couple of weeks and had even started sleeping a little. The first sit was not as hard as I thought. I felt like I could do this. The people seemed all right. I kept going. I never wanted to talk to anyone. I just came and left. I was afraid of being a part of something that reminded me of church. I tried sitting a bit on my own, using guided meditations. Eating became part of my life again. With time, so did sleeping. Everything slowed down. There was less terror in my head. I began to connect with people in the meditation group, forming some tentative friendships. I didn't really know if the actual meditation stuff was helping or if it was just me hanging on. I heard a lot of things talked about that I had never heard of before. Mindfulness practice and Buddhism were totally foreign to me. I read Dharma Punks. I can't say this name, so I'm just going to spell it Thich. Second name, part of the name, Nhat, and last name, Hanh. Book, so I could try to understand what the hell people were saying. What I did grasp was that it was okay for me to simply be at any stage of practice. I didn't have to feel bad or beat myself up. A gentle turning down of the volume of my self-hatred. The phrase that spoke to me so deeply during the guided sits was, "You can't do this wrong." Maybe I was too tired to turn away from everything, so I just did it, and it helped. I learned that I could sit in my pain and it wouldn't kill me. That the moment is here, and it is like this. A couple of months into my sobriety, I got incredibly sick. Flu rocked my body. I would wake up 3 or 4 times in the night to change my clothes, which soaked through with sweat. My body ached. My kidneys ached. I lay on the couch where I had done so much drunk time and let my body rattle out the last gasps of detox. It was terrifying, exhausting, and incredibly painful. A girl from the meditation group brought me some soup. Just that simple act blew me away. Accepting the help was so hard for me, but there was something about that soup that helped me know I wasn't alone anymore. Not if I didn't want to be. Gradually, as my body healed and my mind cleared, the basic concepts of the Dharma started to resonate with me. With time, I began to learn the Dharma points to the inherent suffering in life, but that I can still learn to be with it. My sits became painful at times. I signed up for a class with our teacher and was introduced to the heart practices: loving kindness, forgiveness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. These help me face and carry the things that hurt. I turn towards all my pain, anger, confusion, and despair, learning to care about these things instead of pushing it all away and wallowing in my desire for things to be different. Meeting my pain with loving kindness seemed to give me a foundation to stand on. Instead of just desperately clinging to each moment of sobriety and trying to not drink, I began to learn how to be with pain and joy and be okay. Meditation cut right into my core and addressed my heart. I began to see my craving as part of my humanity, not something that is wrong with me. I no longer feel as though I need to be fixed. Meditation helps me see how I crave all things pleasurable and absolutely hate what is uncomfortable, but it also helps me to see the truth of impermanence. What I hate and I am uncomfortable with right now will pass, and what is pleasurable and joyful will also pass. There are times when this is a great comfort to me, and times when it really hurts. Things in my life began to transform. My roommate moved out, and Celia came home from Mexico and moved in. My sister got out of our small hometown and joined us. My house went from a place where all I knew was desperation and loneliness to a place of safety and love. It was the warmest spring of my life. It was difficult to go from practically living alone to having all these people in my life, but I knew it was good for me despite my frustrations. I learned about compromise and sharing. I learned to let go a little more. One morning as I was driving to the park, a lady ran a red light and totaled my car. This was the first time I noticed a change had taken place. Months before, this would have been a perfect opportunity to freak out and play the victim, to feel desperate and terrified, to angrily shake my fist at life. Instead, I felt grateful that for the first time I was not at fault in the accident, that the police officer wasn't going to take me to jail. I had a driver's license, insurance, no one was hurt. I was shocked at how at ease I was with this happening. I was broke and without a car, but I knew I'd be okay. A drastic difference from my attitude just months before. My sister even commented, "Man, this Dharma stuff seems to really work." 9 months into meditation practice and sobriety, I went on a week-long silent meditation retreat in Yucca Valley, followed by a solo Amtrak trip up the coast to Seattle, then to Chicago before hitting Memphis and coming back to Nashville. The retreat was an excellent opportunity for me to find that I had developed faith, and to deepen my meditation practice by having a direct instruction by teachers. I was continuously confronted by fear that I had become a part of some cult, that this was just more religious bullshit. What I found is that the outward form don't really matter much to me. My direct experience with meditation and practice were the most important thing. I have seen my inner dialogue change and my ability to love myself and others grow as a direct result of Dharma. I can practice anywhere, whether I am in the desert, on a cushion, or riding the bus. Mostly, though, what I felt was overwhelming gratitude for the ways my life had changed, for the fact that I could sit still with myself for so long, that I had at least the willingness to put forth this effort to change my life. Early recovery made the experience overwhelmingly beautiful for me. Afterwards, riding that train up the coast was one of the greatest gifts I'd ever given myself, feeling the smallness as well as the importance of my place in this world. For so long, I thought that all I wanted was to be loved, and the Dharma helped me find all the love inside myself. This has been the most important part of my personal practice. Love as something I cultivate within and not something I desperately search for. I have forgiven myself for the past. My relationships with men transformed. I can hold myself with love and self-respect, and men in my Sangha, which is spelled S-A-N-G-H-A, have taught me about healthy emotional intimacy and friendship. And I have learned about my value as a woman beyond sex. The paradigm of my desire has changed, and I am learning about being my own hero rather than looking for someone to rescue me. Shortly after I returned home from traveling, I shattered my knee on a trampoline. I never knew anything could hurt so bad. Unable to afford insurance, I knew I was screwed. I was terrified about having to go to the hospital, and even more scared about being given painkillers. I've never experienced that kind of pain or fear. The situation was completely out of my control, one of the worst things I could imagine. I'd never been physically incapacitated, and it was excruciating. Nothing terrified me more than not being able to take care of myself. The news from the doctors kept getting worse. They said it would be months before I could walk again. I was always struggling with asking for help, and this had put me in a position of extreme need. My practice showed up for me. The only way I could find ease in that situation was to be in each moment. As soon as I would worry about the future or what would happen to me, I would mentally spiral out of control. All I could do was breathe into the moment and find faith. The pain made painkillers necessary for a brief time, and I was afraid of relapse. My sister helped me keep track of what I was taking, but for the most part it was up to me. I saw that I had a choice. I could take this experience and grow and know the pain and know my fear, or I could check out and wake up a few months later with just nothing but months of being doped up in front of the TV behind me. I didn't want that. Just moving from the couch to the bathroom was an overwhelming task. For months, I was reliant on the help of others and continuously surprised at how readily available people were. Having lived in so much self-hatred and with such strong beliefs that I never deserved to be loved, this became one of the greatest experiences of my life. For months, people brought food, came to visit, people gave me money. My faith in the moment was deepened immeasurably. I learned to be less afraid of pain, less afraid of the future. I was forced to sit and look at the richness of my life, to see how different things had become since I got sober. I celebrated a year of sobriety, steeped in love and gratitude. Now, over a year into my practice, I never knew that life could be like this. As I get used to walking again and being back in the world, I find that my faith in myself and in the Dharma has deepened. There are different times when I feel as though the things are static and I question and doubt my practice. But I find that with effort, I am able to continue my path. Let me repeat that last one. But I find that with effort, I am able to continue my path. Without the drugs, alcohol, and harmful sex, the meditation continues to open my eyes to new ways in which I can become free. Mental and emotional habits have started to change. Not only has the angry judge in my mind become quieter, I have learned I don't have to listen to the endless rants of self-judgment or self-hatred. Forgiveness, kindness, and compassion have become an ongoing process in my life, and I am not seeking a magical point of arrival when I will finally be done hurting or learning. My heart has melted into a tender and subtle muscle that beats passionately, even when it feels broken. I have learned about trust and support, connection, and openness through Sangha. I don't feel as though I have subscribed to a set of beliefs like a religion, but that I have picked up a valuable set of tools that I utilize daily. Dharma has become something that lives and breathes in my life, influencing and changing my perspective continuously. Inclusive and fluid, I don't find that it prescribes guilt or regret when I make mistakes. It allows me to open my view and learn a better way to live. I don't find a cure for my pain or past, but a path that seems to always lead me towards more freedom and authenticity in my life. That's it for tonight, guys. We got one more chapter, and then we have a bunch of meditations we're going to get into so we can put this into practice in our own ways and for our own purposes. Namaste. Good night, guys.